Well, good afternoon. I want to thank Mark for this opportunity to join with all of you. This is an extraordinary privilege to be here. Not that it's unusual. I made it a routine to come here to Fresno, to the Central Valley. A few years ago, when I was in my previous position as the controller, I had commissioned a study about California relative to Texas's competitiveness. And so when you started drawing contrasts and comparisons in regards to frameworks, economies, Austin, Texas is the highest real estate market in Texas. And so if you're trying to draw equivalent, the equivalent would be Fresno. So as we're going to prosper and make sure where we place investments, where you go all in regards to price structure, right, you have to make sure that we're invested in Fresno and the Central Valley to make sure that we prosper. And then I want to thank President Castro for being here. I deeply appreciate your activism. I've come up here multiple times for my campaign for governor, but I've come regularly too, and on a non-campaign visit, we sat down and we talked about the issues that we're passionate about. We share a lot of the same values. Give you a perspective, my parents came to this country separately from Taiwan in the 1950s. And like so many other Americans, so many like your family stories, they didn't come with a whole lot. My dad had 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants. English was his 5th language. He had less than $100 in his pocket to try to make that dream work. And so he moved our family through lower middle class to middle class, and it was all based on the idea of education. And as the president shared with me today, Fresno State has reached 17th in social upward mobility amongst institutions. So when you, absolutely. So when Stanford's #1, was it Harvard was #2? Yeah. They're in trouble, right? Fresno State is the on course, right? And frankly, it's a little bit different, right? Because we know with some of those other institutions, I don't know what the metric was, but for a lot of the public institutions, they carry a lot more people. Right? When you just look at the numbers, right? Because we also have high-performing other Cal States, Cal State East Bay, Cal State LA, and so you'll look at some of the exclusive and elite, and they're doing a terrific job, but they just don't have the same numbers that the public universities are carrying. So when we're talking about a fundamental change, when we're talking about expanding opportunities, you have to have measurable, meritorious numbers, and so Cal State is making that happen. And then we talk about things that we're really passionate about. I care about food insecurity. I care about housing insecurity. The numbers that were reported in regards to 10% plus of our Cal State students who are housing insecure, right? So it's not just the academics and making sure that you have a terrific academic regime, right? Today our challenges are what type of lifestyle do individuals have, right? Do they have access, or are they going to be struggling throughout? So I appreciate, Mr. President, your vision in making sure that we provide comprehensive efforts to make sure that all generations of Californians are getting that opportunity. And so that's frankly been my focus. I am very different than the others in regards to background, in regards to focus, in regards to passion. I am the only person in California history to have served in all 3 financial offices. The Board of Equalization, and I know for many people it's not sexy, but it's the tax authority, right? So everybody talks about investing in education. Well, if you don't understand the tax structure, if you don't understand the volatility, if you don't understand the transformations of our economy, right, you're making an empty promise to President Castro about what you're going to do in regards to making sure that we can provide for higher education, or frankly, all of education in the state of California. I next served as your state's chief fiscal officer. I was the controller, right? And so I was responsible for the accounting, the auditing. There's multiple auditing authorities, but auditing, sitting on economic development authorities. And I was the person who stood up in Sacramento, both challenging Republicans and members of my party, Democrats, when they got the math wrong, right? I was the voice when Governor Schwarzenegger signed a budget that was 85 days late because it used to require a 2/3 vote, and they came to a convenient budget, and it was the budget signed for over $103 billion. I was the loudest voice in Sacramento saying, we need to fix this, else we're going to have a fiscal crisis in California. And I was right, because as the controller, you used to see my signature on your checks. I worked really hard on unclaimed property, so tax refund checks, unclaimed property. My first year in office, I was here in Fresno, and I was bragging about the fact that I chair the franchise tax board, and I push a lot of technology, I push a lot of transparency. So I said, if you file your tax returns and you're entitled to a refund, I want to encourage you to file early in January, submit electronically, act for direct deposit, and we can get your tax refunds to you within 2 weeks. Right? And early in the season, actually, we used to get your tax refunds to you in 3 to 7 days. So I came to Fresno and shared that. The next year when we're in fiscal crisis, I said, hey, I want to go up and down the state and tell people, and they said, don't tell people, right, because we don't have enough money to pay people. Right? In fact, I had to hold back your tax refunds for 23 days because when the governor and legislature don't get the budget correct, there's not enough cash to pay the state's bills. And again, education and healthcare, the two largest source of expenditures for the state, pay the heaviest price. And when you have Valley Children's, right, and Todd was kind enough, the CEO, to sit me down, right, and discuss the issues, and you're talking about Medicare funding or federal funding for 90+% of the funding for services, right? We know it can be extraordinarily challenging between what's happening at the federal and state level. And so and today as your state treasurer, I'm the banker, right? So I try to make sure we get the best deal on debt. As your state treasurer, my first 2.5 years, I've been able to save through refinancing $5.5 billion for all of us over the lifetime of those bonds. Now, how much is $5.5 billion? We contribute as a state $3.7 billion to the University of California system. And to give you a context why I'm so tough with a dollar, come from immigrant stock, right? I mentioned my mom was tough with every single nickel, but a penny saved is a penny earned, right? That's additional money that we can put into education or healthcare. And so that's one area which is really different about my work than others, right? How do you keep California on a strong financial track so that we can realize our dreams? And my work is all about upward economic and social mobility, the same things that this country, this state offers. I want to make sure that we pass on to the next generation of Californians, right? I feel so blessed to have this opportunity to be in California. They'll allow me to live the life that I dreamed of. But what has always made America great is that we always wanted to pass that on to our kids and our grandkids, right? No generation of Americans have given their kids and grandkids less. And so that work that I did in the financial offices, I want to take to the governor's office and to make sure that this state even reaches higher levels for all. And so that's why my work has been focused on education, housing, job creation, and the things that make for a strong California. And my work is not foreign to the Central Valley. I come here routinely to talk about how do we bring more capital investment to this communities. So if you look at the affordable housing projects in this community, it's financed, a lot of those out of the Treasurer's office. If you look at a lot of the waste facilities and cleaner companies that they're bringing in, financed out of the Treasurer's office. And I wanted to make sure that we build that partnership on a much larger scale. Now, my parents immigrated from Asia, so I've done a lot of work about the diversity in this state, right? And I wanted to challenge the thinking back in Washington, D.C. We are blessed that the imagination of people from all across this globe is about coming to California, coming to America. And so, right, it doesn't make sense about what we're trying to do with Mexico when up until last year, Mexico was California's largest trading partner. Right? We want to take advantage of that. We want to grow that. When Canada is one of our top 3 trading partners, we want to be smart about that. When China becomes one of our top 3 trading partners. And when you think about where middle class opportunities are going to grow, 90% of the people that are going to move into the middle class in this world live in Asia, China, India, right? And for most of them, their first port of entry is California. And so we want those economic opportunities. We want that access to talent in people, right? They're making investments here in the Central Valley. They're leading the #1 highest performing economic region in the United States of America, the Silicon Valley. We don't want them bypassing California to go to Texas or New York or elsewhere. And they're that opportunity for building middle-class jobs. I met with CIC, the China Investment Corporation, right? And they're talking about, hey, John, can you introduce us to more manufacturing companies in the United States of America that are struggling? So they, for instance, they said, right, we have to feed 300 to 400 more middle-class folks, right? And they want more products. And they said, a lot of these farmers can't afford the most expensive equipment, right? They can't buy the Caterpillar stuff, but they can buy some of the John Deere stuff, right? So John Deere and others that were struggling said, hey, we want to make investments. We want to buy those types of products. I want to make sure we build more of those middle market opportunities, because it can't be just the largest corporations, the Apples and others that are in China. And we have extraordinary talent here in Fresno, in the Central Valley, right? And it's trying to find how do we build those economic opportunities that is really going to help this community flourish, right? When we talk about the extraordinary difference between the income inequality, right? It's lifting through economic development, lifting through education, building more affordable housing that is really going to create the brightest hopes and dreams for all of our residents for this state. So with that, I just wanted to thank you for this extraordinary opportunity. Part of the, I know so many people feel disconnected from Sacramento, but when I get to be governor, you're going to be part of that leadership. Right, what happens here, as I stated at the very outset, is absolutely key and critical to California's future success. So thank you all for being here.
Cost of higher education, so more students can afford, and without a big debt.
Yeah, so we're going to have to talk. One of the things that I want to, it's not just for Fresno State, but UC, Cal State, community colleges. We're going to have conversations with everybody about sustainable source of funding, right? You can't have the volatility in financing that we had, because at the end of the day, the students pay the price. When you think about around that last recession, the 10-year period of time, we increased tuition and fees on UC and Cal State students by 113%. We increased tuition and fees on community college students by 130%. So the students are drowning in debt, right? To get out of the debt, it's taken them longer. They're not buying the entry-level housing, which is more expensive. And our businesses suffer because we can't keep world-class, first-class academic performance with great skill sets graduating from wonderful universities here in this state. So I'm going to try to bring everybody to the table and figure out what's the best source of permanent funding, or making sure that we have a plan, a discussion about, we have a rainy day plan for the state, a rainy day fund for education, and then the president and I were talking about bonds, so that upgrades on energy and infrastructure. The University of California a couple years ago went to century bonds, right, to get long-term sources of borrowing at much cheaper rates. We need to have those types of conversations also with the Cal State programs. And then, frankly, one of the things, as I was talking to Todd, the CEO of Valley Children's, right? He had great ideas in regards to healthcare financing, but also how you use community resources, right? So when Todd and I were sitting down, he was talking about the partnerships with Valley Children's and some of the school districts, and he said something that just really moved me. We all know the stories, but just to be in those communities, how 3 of the schools in the Fresno School District have over 50% of their kids that are homeless, right? And so we were talking about how we need to bring better partnerships between schools. And so I want a lot of those resources focused around educational facilities, the schools, partners with the counties, the nonprofits, the corporations, because you want to keep the kids in the schools, right? Because a kid out of a classroom, right, is detrimental to the community's progress, but more importantly to the child's progress, right? How do they get access to the healthcare services at the classroom? Because you don't want parents who oftentimes are transportation challenged to take a day off to try to figure out how they can use mass transportation or their own transportation if available to travel to multiple places to get the services they need so that they can work, right? So I want to build partnerships with the state and local levels to make sure that we can do this much more efficiently so we can improve the quality of life of all Californians.
Open up the questions. So.
But I'm going to wear my white hat on today. My husband's a third-generation Japanese farmer in a small community of Fowler. And one thing that I'm sure you've heard of that is a main area of concern for farmers in the area is water infrastructure, and particularly Temperance Flat. So if you were to become our next governor, where would you prioritize that?
Yes.
Amongst the other issues that you'd be working on?
Yeah, so we don't have a statewide infrastructure plan. And so before the water issue, one of the things that I think the state needs to do, and I advocated in my treasurer's plan from last year, is that we need to identify what the state's needs are for infrastructure. And once you identify all the infrastructure that we have in place, what is its beneficial use? Who's using that infrastructure? Who's the beneficiaries of those infrastructure? And what's the condition of that particular infrastructure? We know for a lot of our surface storage, right, they are designed for, like Oroville, right, 60-year periods, and that oftentimes because of some of the funding issues, right, some of the rate regulators and others that are paying for it, because a lot of these water districts have a lot of cost considerations that they have to, like, are we going to do stormwater recapture? Are we going to do other types of infrastructure development? And oftentimes they say, right, they don't plan for additional fee on an emergency spillway for Oroville, so it's never built in the rate regulation. So we need to have a franker, more deeper discussion about all of those things. And so whether it is Temperance Flat, whether it is San Luis, right, we understand that we need to figure out how to capture that runoff. I don't have all the answers on that, but I recognize that we need more surface storage and how most effectively and efficiently to capture that and doing it in an optimal fashion. I am open to, and I think the state needs to do it, but on specific and where we are, right? Because I know massive runoff on Temperance Flat, cost efficiency issues, how do we improve it? The balancing between this and other types of programs. I know an economic peril and the lives that are impacted. So I want to get everybody to work to do it, so that's sort of my approach.
What solutions you have thought about in terms of affordable housing and the affordable housing crisis throughout California? We've seen an increase in homelessness here in the Valley and all across the state, with property values increasing and lack of just rentals or rent places to rent. What do you think is the solution for the state? And if you have any suggestions specifically for that?
Yeah, so I think I've been working actively on this issue for a period of time. So 2.5 years when I became the treasurer, when I articulated what my most important policy focus was going to be, of the three that I mentioned, housing was at the very top of the list. Right? We know that we're 1.5 million units short. I sit on 3 of the state's 4 housing authorities. So I've tried to be more efficient about how we use the limited resources that we have at the state level. So in my first year in office, I brought interested parties, nonprofit developers, rural developers, urban developers, for-profit developers, those who build, environmentalists, all the interested parties, homeless advocates, seniors advocates, veterans advocates, as to how we ought to approach affordable housing. So after that round of statewide meetings, we did a revision. And so in my second year in office, we were able to increase construction of affordable housing units by 80%. Now, it's admittedly off a small base. We took it from between 13 and 14,000 to about 25,000. On an annual basis, we need about 60 to 70,000 units of deep affordable housing. right? So I'm trying to get the agency on the curve so that we can meet that 60 to 70,000 on an annual basis. And how I did part of that is I cut red tape. I wanted to make it more efficient for developers to build it. So for instance, if you used to deal with TCAC, if you're a developer and let's say you wanted to build four different complexes in the Central Valley, you used to file 4 different applications. Under the authority that I now chair, you only have to file 1 application, right? And then we try to make the rules easier to comply with, right? Giving flexibility. And we also try to work to preserve affordable housing units, right? Some of them wanted to take it to market rate. We wanted to create incentives to say, try to keep it affordable, or some of the market rate through a different authority, try to keep it at market rate. We would try to acquire it instead of it becoming priced at the highest levels so that first-time home buyers or others would still get access to those particular units. Today, this morning, so we were in communication with the Speaker's office. Some of you might have read over the last month, I've been one of the strongest advocates for pushing for a higher bond to build more housing in this state. I went out last year and started to bring in developers and builders and others, and I got some seed money, and we polled to see what we could do with housing in this state. And the numbers are astonishing, right? 60% plus of us know somebody who has moved because of the cost of housing, right? And the numbers of somebody who knows somebody who's homeless or others is astronomical. And so when the legislature and Senator Jim Bell did good work on a $3 billion bond, I was trying to encourage them to turn that bond into something larger, $6 billion, or $9 billion, right? This is our opportunity, because if you don't do something big with housing, right, in Sacramento, right, you work on something, the next year they don't keep working on it, right? That's why you have to try to do something big when you have the chance, because you go back to the legislature or others, they say, we worked on it last year. And it's hard to say you didn't finish the issue, right? If we do $3 billion, it's 65,000 units, right? Remember, we're 1.5 million units short. We got a long ways to go. That's why he's pushing it. So we're making progress, right? They may not reach the number that I want to, but we're going to make progress. So, right, and you don't hear that from some of the others, right? I've been working on housing in those 2 respects. And then third, talking about a long-term funding source for housing. So I've been pushing bringing back redevelopment agencies to give local government officials the tool for economic development and a source of affordable housing. I was the person who did a review. Now you say, what's a review? It's not quite an audit, right? There's standards to do an audit, but we did a review. And so I want to bring back local economic development tools, right? Because when you talk about investing, but making sure that we fix some of the distractions, inefficiencies, and illegal activity that happened around redevelopment agencies. So it's not only a one-time source to close the gap, but ongoing sources of opportunities so that we can build more affordable housing. And then, right, some of that would capture the homeless and other programs. And then it would tie back to what we talked about earlier in regards to healthcare. You want to bring all the interested parties together to address this issue.
There's mental health issues and challenges also in that homeless piece. We make a very small investment in this state in mental health services. In fact, our sheriff here says she's a mental health officer in our county.
Yeah.
Because that's where she gets it. So what's your solution to funding mental health issues?
Yeah, so well, part of that is that what they've been doing from the millionaire's tax on the Prop 63, and they're trying to, right, they wanted to shift some of that for the No Place Like Home program. So we're working with them to figure out how to optimize those particular programs. But again, it's using those monies on other ways in partnership with what we're trying to do with housing, because I am a supporter of that program, right? You want to house the homeless, those with mental health issues first. Right, you're not going to get all those. You had the Nathaniel Ayers story that was reported in another publication. Right, it's difficult for those who have mental health issues to accept getting into housing, but it's tying all those programs where you can bring those social services in partnership with the housing efforts that we're working to try to get the positive change that's needed, and also a redirection of or understanding that we're opening up some of the resources, because your point is squared on all 4 corners in Los Angeles when they were talking about spending $100 million on the homeless issue, right? And they were talking about 90% of that money going actually for law enforcement addressing homeless issue, especially with mental health issues, right? That was the inefficient use, right? Law enforcement should not be the frontline personnel in regards to addressing mental health issues. So how do we tie in the county, state, other types of services with policies that we have in place, with operations and procedures we have in place to address those issues more effectively and upfront?
Answer, but one of my biggest concerns is if anything catastrophic should happen to the Affordable Care Act, how would you as governor not only react to that, but what would we be able to do in a state to cover all those people that will be without?
Yeah, so it's going to be very challenging. So just to demonstrate some action that I've taken, so there have been 4 community clinics in California that have shut down since there's been a new administration in place, right? The community clinics serve 1 out of every 7 Californians in this state, and especially in rural areas, right? They don't have some of the same densities, and so the overhead infrastructure to build out a lot of those healthcare facilities is much more expensive. I chair the California Health Facilities Financing Authority. We have a program called the Help to Loan Program. It helps for construction for community clinics. They had built up the original $5 million contribution or grant funding from the legislature over a period of time, built it up to $29 million. In discussing this with Assembly Member Dr. Joaquina Rambula, Senator Holly Mitchell from Los Angeles, Senator Dr. Pan from Sacramento, we said we wanted to repurpose 20 million of those dollars at Chaffa and have various community clinics apply for $250,000 grants to figure out what they could do to figure out how to keep their doors open or financing plans for the long term, at least during this administration, if there's considerations of pulling back healthcare financing to try to keep them alive. So that's what we're doing. We did immediately just to try to keep these clinics afloat. Now, we know that nothing has passed thus far, but the numbers are huge, right? So if you had the healthcare plan as passed by the House of Representatives, that would have been a $6 billion loss. $6 billion loss to the state of California. If you look at the full repeal of the Affordable Care Act, we're looking at a $23 billion reduction in funding to the state of California. Anybody know how much our general fund budget for California is? $125 billion. And then our all-in is $180 billion plus, right? So if we take out $6 billion, $6 billion is more than the state contributes to all of the, or around what we give to Cal State University, right? So if you're trying to draw some equivalencies. So obviously it'd be massive. So part of that would, the discussion immediately would be to some cost cutting, right? Who's going to be covered, or do we not expand, right? Because the last time we had a healthcare crisis during that 2008, 2009 recession, right? And we got out of the recession in 2010, but the economy, we were still in financial 2012, right? That's why we passed that tax increase. And they pulled back, over a dozen services from healthcare. So it'd be a lot of those conversations about, what are we going to pull back? And we know that a lot of healthcare providers won't provide services into the Medi-Cal program because reimbursement rates are so low, right? That's going to be a continuing challenge, right? Because if we got those monies pulled back, those reimbursement rates would be so low so that in effect, even though those services are technically offered, there's nobody available to deliver those services. So it's going to be challenging. And then just so that we have a sense of its devastation to the economy, during the last recession, California lost 1.3 million jobs. We recovered 2.4 million jobs, and so we have the world's 6th largest economy today. The estimated net loss of jobs to this state would be 209,000 jobs. So it would pull back our economy. right? So you're thinking pre-recession, 15 million taxpayers in California. We dropped to 14 million taxpayers. Today we have about 16 million taxpayers. We don't want to lose 209,000 taxpayers.
Thanks for your honesty. Appreciate it.
Well, I want to thank State Treasurer John Chiang.
Thank you.